Shalom shalom عرب طوب يسلم لكم إلوما تغوركم تسليمكم. So normally I do my very best to try to refrain from introducing rhetoric that would seem a little biased towards addressing one's personality as opposed to one's professionalism. But let me just go ahead and say this, that the proprietor of Gabourey is the worst type of individual. They prey upon individuals who don't have access or have yet to access viable, substantive, tangible information. This individual looks to misappropriate information. This individual looks to deceive people purposely, maliciously, for his own personal whim. He's the worst type of individual.
וואו, איזה דבר. בן זונה, תקשיב לי. אם אתה רוצה לדבר איתי בעברית, יאללה. גם אני רוצה. ממש גם אני רוצה. הבנת? אבל קודם כל אמרתי לך שאנחנו מדברים רק עברית. לא אנגלית, לא גם וגם ולא חצי וחצי. רק עברית. אם אתה לא יכול לעשות את זה, אין בעיה, אחי. לא אחי, סליחה, בן זונה. אין בעיה, בן זונה. אבל אתה צריך להגיד את זה וגם למה. זה פשוט ככה, בן זונה. חבל על הזמן. It's important that people understand that there's a history of the Hebrew language, and if you're going to be an authority of the language, you should become familiar with all forms of the language. Not just the, one segment of the history of the language that interests you, but if you're going to be claiming that you know the language, then you should know the modern. You don't go to someone to learn old English, old Victorian English, or old Shakespearean English from someone who does not speak a word of modern English. That's just absolutely ridiculous. You don't do that. Okay? If you're going to be an authority of the language, then you should be comfortable in all forms of the language. You should know ancient Hebrew, the grammar, the morphology, the phonology, and all that. You should also know Mishnaic Hebrew. You should know Tiberian Hebrew. You should know Babylonian, Yemenite Hebrew. You should know all these different facets of the language and how they differ and why they differ. Okay, that's the only way you can hope to understand what the ancients should sound like. And what he is saying, his version of the dialect, is absolutely, it's an abomination. Okay, you can say what you want about Gabourey, what I'm teaching, but this, I mean, what the hell is that? That is the most ridiculous thing I've ever. I mean, it's just absolutely, no segment of the human population should ever be expected to speak like that. And our goal is not just to teach teach people to decipher and parse and translate into English. We want people to understand the language and become fluent so they can speak and bring the language back to life. That's what our goal is. Okay, so he's just jacking up the language and making sure that no one ever wants to become. Who the hell wants to become fluent in? Give me a break, man. What the hell is that? What the hell is that? It's garbage. Garbage. Pure garbage. But anyway, let's listen to him rant, and then I will stop at appropriate points and correct him. And then hopefully you guys will learn what's really at stake here. There's a lot at stake that's not being said. The hidden agendas that Mitzi guy is really all about, which I will bring out in the course of this video. So let's just let's listen.
This guy believes, or he professes, that the original pronunciation was Gabourey, right? And so basically what this means, he's assigning this, this grapheme, with the phonemic value of the voice velar fricative as opposed to the pharyngeal fricative. All right, so that means he has said that ancient Hebrew, right, ancient Hebrew only possessed the voice velar fricative and did not possess the pharyngeal fricative because he pronounces the language as.
Okay, let's stop Mr. Mitzi right there and let's deal with what he just said. Remember now, he's saying that I have no access to, what did he say, substantive, tangible, viable sources, or that I do have access to those sources, but that I'm misappropriating them in order to deceive people. you know, all that stuff. The fact of the matter is, he's never actually cited any sources in any of these videos that I've seen. He just rambles off like he's, some type of psychic. But his sources are outdated. He's talking about this phoneme. He's pointing to it. He won't give it a name. You gotta, make up your mind. It's commonly called ayin. And this phoneme, in biblical Hebrew, this phoneme does not have more than one phonemic value attested, okay, until the Greek period, 3rd century BC. When we look at the Septuagint translation of the Old Testament, that's the only time we see evidence of this phoneme in biblical Hebrew having more than one phonemic value. Now, what he's getting ready to try to slip in and not be honest with you, he's going to jump to the Ugaritic language. He's going to tell you that it's an older Northwest Semitic language than Hebrew, biblical Hebrew. That's what's being taught at the university level, and that is the prevailing consensus, is that Ugaritic is a Northwest Semitic language that is older than biblical Hebrew. And in that language, in the Ugaritic language, there are 30 letters in their grapheme index, and each letter only has one phonemic value. Okay, so the theory goes that when biblical Hebrew appeared in the end of the 11th century or the 10th century BC, when the biblical Hebrew alphabet was devised and it only had 22 letters, some of these letters were assigned more than one phonemic value. Okay, that's what he's getting ready to say, that I'm wrong because this letter has more than one value and you're not giving it the right value when you pronounce this word. That's what he's going to try to that's what he's going to try to say. He's not very intelligent because he doesn't understand that I bait him intentionally with my rhetoric and my antics into these types of arguments just so I can, smash him. If he knew that, he wouldn't make these mistakes, but he always takes my bait, and so I'm going to crucify him. But if you believe that biblical Hebrew, the language that the Bible was written in, is not older than Ugaritic, you have a problem. At least, if you don't believe the scriptures, then you don't have a problem. But if you do believe the scriptures, you have a problem. You have a conflict, because Ugaritic is only attested from the end of the late Bronze Age, end of the 14th century to the 12th century. That's when Ugaritic is attested. But the internal data of the scriptures is telling us that the Thorah of Moses, the first 5 books of the Bible, was composed by him in the 15th century. So before there was Ugaritic, the Thorah was composed by Moshe. Now, of course, scholars reject that. Critical, secular, conventional scholars reject that because they're only basing the existence of Hebrew based on the archaeology of the earliest attested epigraphy, the earliest attested inscription. Okay, but what we say in scholarship is that absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. And Mitzi doesn't understand that principle because, I guess he wasn't really taught how to do deductive reasoning and critical thinking. He just basically sits there and just swallows the consensus view, not being critical of it, and then he just regurgitates it. And anything that opposes it, that consensus, he has a knee-jerk reaction to it, which is basically a sign of a person who hasn't learned to think for themselves. But if you believe that, that the biblical Hebrew is not older than Ugaritic, then you have a problem, and you will have to make a decision. You have to decide, what side of the fence are you on? Since Ugaritic only has 30 letters in its grapheme index, and only one phonemic value per letter, we're saying the same thing, that in biblical Hebrew, there's only one phonemic value per letter. And the only evidence we have that some of these letters in the biblical Hebrew alphabet have more than one phonemic value is not until we get into the Greek period.
So he put up a post not too long ago, and he was saying that, the Masoretic tradition and the vocalization and articulation of consonants is problematic because, you have a class vowel here, A class vowel here, and all of a sudden an O just happens to pop up out of nowhere. And so that says to me he doesn't know the grammar well enough to understand why there's an O class vowel here in the second radical or the syllable ultima and the third masculine singular G stem prefix conjugation. All right. Clearly, he doesn't understand the grammar, because if he did, There's no possible way he ever would have said an O-class vowel just happened to pop up here. He also contended that this bait being vocalized or articulated as a labial dental is a problem, and I can give him that. Okay, the bait legitimately is a voice bilabial. Okay, so even when it's plosive, we're going to get a ba, and even when it's fricative, it's not going to be a v, because v linguistically is a labial dental. Okay, and this is a voiced bilabial. So the reason that we see this interesting vowel assignment is because this is a pharyngeal fricative, and we know that the pharyngeal fricative and the epiglottals have a propensity towards the A-class vowel when it's in the syllable ending position. So even if we were to try to give this prefix radical an I-class vowel, the minute you have to negotiate the distance to produce this consonant is going to significantly impact the quality of this vowel. Thus, the Masoretes assigned an A-class vowel here. And also notice that this would be an A-class vowel. So Yaqub.
Okay, this is quite sad. Probably the worst example you could have used is this one right here. If you're going to represent the Masorete system, you're going to have to do it correctly. Okay, you can't fake the funk on this one. The patach is its own syllable. It creates its own syllable. And the chataf patach vowel beneath the letter ayin is the beginning of another syllable. So whoever taught you to pronounce this name according to the Masorete system as Yaakov taught you wrong. Okay, taught you wrong. That is not how we say this name in the Masorete system, the Tiberian Hebrew that I was raised in the synagogue and in Israel everywhere. This name is pronounced Yaakov. Yaakov. That is the Masorete pointing of this name. Yaakov, not Yaakov. So you just had a brain fart right there. As far as the O vowel in the syllable ultimate that you talked about, I was being facetious when I said it pops out of nowhere, but it really does pop out of nowhere because it has no attestation prior to the Hellenistic age, and that's what you're not, that's what you're not getting. Galbary attempts to reconstruct the phonology of the language prior to the Hellenistic period. Okay, so as you cheerlead the consensus, you're just simply not able to understand what's being argued. When a consensus has no foundation, you need to point that out, not just cheerlead it and run behind it like some little girl and appeal to authority. That's not going to work. As for why I treat this name not as an appellative, but as a terse verbal sentence, I'll reserve for later. I'll wait till the end. I'll get to that and explain why I believe this is an example of a theophoric name. It's not simply an appellative. But I'm going to let you rant and stop you again when I need to make my points.
Yaqub. And why? Because the G stem or call stem or simple active stem in the prefix or in the infinitive construct will prominently feature an O-class vowel with the second root radical. So we say second root radical because we can divide the triconsonantal root, root radical 1, root radical 2, root radical 3, R1, R2, R3. So your shorish is comprised of a series of 3 consonants, hence triconsonantal root. Okay, so the Gaboret guy, however he pronounces it, he would like to have you believe that this yod, this prefix value, is his deity's name, like a little contracted form, a short form, okay, of his deity's name. And that's why it has an A-class vowel. And that's preposterous because...
Okay, more regurgitation of the consensus without any critical analysis at all. He is correct that when you have a triconsonantal root and the first letter of that root, the first radical, is a guttural, then you will see the O vowel feature prominently in the second radical in the imperfect, okay, but you will not see it at all in the perfect. So the question is, does this vowel assignment by the Masoretes in the 9th century go back as far as the Iron Age? And the answer is that there is simply no evidence to support that at all. We wouldn't be having this conversation if there was evidence to support that. And why is it an O vowel and not a U vowel? Okay, why choose the O in this case and not some other vowel? It's an arbitrary assignment made at a very late period by the Masoretes, and you need to state that and not mislead people to think that the Masorete system goes back as far as the Bronze Age and the Iron Age, when there is absolutely no evidence of that at all. Also, the part where you say that the first letter, the Yud, is the deity name, and we're basing that off of the fact that there's a vowel, a class A vowel beneath that, is completely wrong. It's a misrepresentation of our view. So I appreciate the straw man, but again, those tactics don't work. They don't work. Okay, you have to correctly represent the side that you oppose if you're going to engage it, and that's just not, that's not going to cut it.
Simple. Yaakov. We don't have to say Yaakov. It's not necessary. This will be fricative all on its own. Physics will dictate that, and there's nothing you can do about it. It's going to be fricative. It's not going to be plosive. So Yaakov, Yaakov. Simple, straightforward. Now let's look at something like a regular verb or a strong verb. Your triconsonantal root here, kaf tata lamed, is a regular verb or a strong verb. There's no irregular features here that would necessitate deviation from what we would consider standard, par for the course as it relates to thematic vowel sequence or selection, right? So here our G stem would prominently feature an I-class vowel with the prefix radical. We would have the shortest vowel possible to allow this consonant to be discernible, followed by, yes, another O-class vowel and root radical 2. Yuqtal, 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 Yaqub, yuqtal.
All right, Mitzi just said that the letter bait in the name is not going to undergo lenition and be softened to a dental labial. He said it will remain plosive. Well, just now, he said it's not going to be plosive. All right, so we've got some contradictions here going on in your presentation. In the Masorete system, it is a dental labial, and you don't even attempt to explain how that happened. The labials and the bilabials tend to merge. They do. So linguistically, it is possible for it to become a dental labial, and we have the evidence that it did in the Masorete system. So you're trying to play both ends of the stick here, and unfortunately that's not going to, I'm the wrong person to try that with. But the real problem is that you're not being consistent here. You're getting yourself confused with your terminology, and it's quite apparent. You keep saying Yaakov, Yaakov, Yaakov. And now you're giving another example, this time with a strong verb, and you're pronouncing this word yekta, 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 which is again not correct if you're going to represent the Masorete system. The Hirik vowel point beneath the letter Yud is not a short vowel. It is a long vowel. This word is pronounced yiktol, yiktol. That is the correct pronunciation of this word in the Masorete system. In the the paradigm of the third masculine singular cal stem, the imperfect singular, it is yiktol, not yiktol, yiktol. I mean, this Goldham dialect that you're pushing is it's got to stop, man. This is comical. Not only are you inconsistent in your usage of the linguistic terminology, but you are also inaccurate. Okay, the plosive, just so people are made aware, is the sound of a consonant that is completely stopping airflow. So if you pronounce the name as Yaakov, Yaakov, that is the example of the bet being a plosive. Now in the Masorete vocalization of this name, what you hear is Yaakov, Yaakov, Yaakov. And the dental labial is a fricative because there is the release of air in the articulation of the consonant at the very end. So for you to sit here and say that Yaakov is not plosive but fricative is just proof that you don't know what the hell you're talking about when it comes to my language. All you are doing is throwing around complex terminology to make it seem like you know what you're talking about, that you're educated, but you know, it doesn't fool someone like me who's fluent in the language. But what you're doing is you're making the language so technical and completely inaccessible to the average person that most people wouldn't want to learn it. I mean, no one in their right mind would want to learn a language that sounds like the way you're making it sound. I mean, how do you talk to your wife, you know, when you're, you know, trying to make foreplay? Effie, brace yourself. Effie, brace yourself. Just stop.
This prefix conjugation, like he shall, okay, he shall supplant, he shall assail, he shall undermine. Okay, this is a simple active verb. Okay, so it's not being done to the person, the individual, or the subject would be performing the action. Okay, here, yaqtal, he shall kill, simple action. Third masculine singular call stem. Lagazar is our call stem infinitive construct. Here's our inseparable preposition. Here's our triconsonantal root. Now let's just come over here and let's just look at our triconsonantal root. Aqab, qatl. And we can create a noun out of this. We can say azar. So in biblical Hebrew, you could probably even look this up if you have access to a lexicon, or, you know, a BDB or the hallowed. Okay, azar. This is how it would be cataloged in your lexicon. Okay, and you would probably call this an ayn, a zain, and a resh. Okay, you would probably be inclined to call this an ayn, a bait, and a dalid. Abd. Okay, obeyed. So abd, the verb to serve, to work. Abd. And if we want to create a noun, we could say obeyed, a male servant. Azar. Okay, a helper. All right. Now, why are we beating on this? You know, why do we pick these?
Okay, let me pause them right there again. What he said at the beginning of this clip is, of course, not correct. We do not treat all instances of the third person masculine singular call stem imperfect verb conjugation as a personal name. Okay, I think he's aware of that, just playing games. We don't do that. The way we would pronounce this, if it were the verb, the conjugated verb, we would pronounce this as yaikub. Yaikub. The yud prefix would be modifying the verb. The guttural in the first position of the triconsonantal root would become a vowel, and we would pronounce it as yaikub. As I said earlier, we treat the patriarch's name not as a conjugated verb, but as a terse verbal sentence. And I will explain why we do that later. One of the main reasons, just to give you a heads up, is that we do not believe that the deity names ever get shortened. There is no evidence of any deity name in the ancient Near East being shortened to a pet form or nickname. So when you have a theophoric name that has a yud prefix, and that yud is actually just representing the deity name, you pronounce the full name of the deity. You don't shorten it just because of the orthography of the spelling. You pronounce the full name, and then you finish out the rest of the word. And what you said at the end of this clip is also incorrect. The two words that you talk about here at the end, the first word being the word for, or to help, the verb to help, okay, is not going to be pronounced aza, you know, with a class A vowel. In the Masoretic system, what you're not telling people is that beneath the ayin, the first radical, is a tsere vowel point. Okay, the consonantal value completely disappears, and the way this word is pronounced is ezer. There is no guttural anymore. Okay, same thing if you look at the next word that you try to pronounce, the word to serve, the verb to serve. Okay, underneath the ayin is a kamatz, and underneath the bet is a patach, two vowels. So what you're doing is you're saying abd, and that's wrong. The way you pronounce this word is abad. Okay, and once again, the ayin has completely lost its consonantal value. It's being treated as a Class A vowel. But just to return to the infinitive for a second, for the verb ezer. Okay, the way you're pronouncing it, laza, laza, you know, even there, that pronunciation, the guttural quality is, you know, lost. You've just completely merged the two syllables into a, you know, one giant Class A vowel. Laza, laza. So I understand why you're doing it, but it's wrong if you're trying to retain the guttural quality of the first radical. The way we pronounce the infinitive in Gabare is simply la gazar, la gazar, la gazar. And so we bring back the guttural quality of the phoneme in the infinitive of that word. The inseparable preposition would have its own vowel, la, you know, just like you wrote it here with a batach beneath a lamed, but you don't make that clear in your pronunciation. And then you just pronounce the verb, ghazar, la ghazar, la ghazar. Simple. Now, in your rendition of this infinitive, laza, 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 I noticed that there is no O vowel. And since you made an issue out of the O vowel, I'm wondering why you don't pronounce it. I mean, I know why I don't pronounce it. But according to you, it's supposed to be there. And he clearly doesn't know his grammar. So, you know, your inconsistency and, you know, the level of hypocrisy is quite evident. So maybe you want to explain that your O suddenly vanished when you got to the infinitive of this word. So the la azor in the Tiberian Hebrew and also the modern, the way this infinitive is pronounced, becomes la gazar in Gabare, and the lazer that you pulled out of your ass, I think you should just put it back, really. Bema uchal la azor lecha benzona. Ma piton.
All right. Now, why are we beating on this? You know, why do we pick these? Okay. Well, because this con artist that created this fantasy language, Gabare, contends that this right here, when you see this grapheme exclusively represents the voiced velar fricative. Now we can go to a language that is attested older than his Hebrew, right? Because remember, he's creating this fantasy construct based on what he believes the language should have been. But we can go to a language older than his oldest Hebrew attestation, and we can find evidence that a Northwest Semitic language, cognate language that contributed significantly to the formation of the Hebrew Bible, possesses the pharyngeal fricative and the voiced velar fricative. All right, so.
All right, I'm done eating, but I want you to pay very, very, very close attention to what he just said. Okay, he is saying that Ugaritic is older than the Hebrew used to write the Thorah by Masha, aka Moses. And again, Ugaritic is not attested archaeologically until around 1300 BC, end of the 14th century. Okay, now here comes the Trojan horse. He just said that Ugaritic contributed to the formation of Biblical Hebrew because Ugaritic is supposedly older than Biblical Hebrew. It preceded Biblical Hebrew. Okay, now this is the consensus view taught at the university level, and I never suggested that it wasn't. I simply say that it has no place in a community that believes the internal claims of the biblical text to be valid. Okay? Again, the internal data of the Bible is putting the composition of the Thorah in the 15th century BCE. Simply look up 1 Kings 6:1, and you will find that it states that how King Shalamah, aka Solomon, began to build the first temple 480 years after the Exodus. Okay, now Shalimar became king at the end of the 11th century, beginning of the 10th century. So 480 years prior would put the Exodus smack dab in the 15th century. And the Thorah was completed by Mashah 40 years after the Exodus, which is still the 15th century. This is before there was a Northwest Semitic language called Ugaritic. Now that's the internal claims of the Bible. You either believe it or you don't. I know conventional scholars reject that. I spent all my undergrad and postgraduate studies arguing with my professors about it, challenging them at every turn. You don't just bend over backwards and let them shove, their unsubstantiated theories up your rectum. You challenge it. You criticize it. You don't just accept it. This Mitzi Golem guy doesn't know how to do that. If you're just going to be a cheerleader for the consensus of, conventional white European scholarship, then, as far as I'm concerned, you're a target, and I'm going to practice on you, every chance I get. Sorry, dude, but I'm going to crucify you and enjoy doing it.
Here, you can look in your BDB or whatever that you have. This would be an Ein in Hebrew. This would be a Zain Resh. Ein, Zain, Resh. You can look that up. This would be your Shoresh. Okay? Okay? Zeh HaShoresh. This is the Shoresh. Ein, Beit, Dal, Zeh HaShoresh. This is the Shoresh. Okay? Elich HaShoreshim. And these are the roots. You can look these up. This won't take you long. Ein, Zain, Resh. Ein, Beit, Resh. All right.
Okay. Is it look up the word Ayin Zain Resh and Ayin Bet Dalit, or is it look up the words Ayin Zain Resh and Ayin Bet Resh? Because it can't be both. Can't be both. Don't tell people to go look up Ayin Beit Resh. You can't even recognize your own handwriting when it's looking right at you.
Ayin Beit Dal Zeh HaShoresh. This is the Shoresh. Okay? Elich HaShoreshim. And these are the roots. You can look these up. This won't take you long. Ayin Zain Resh. Ayin Beit Resh. All right? Your earliest Hebrew, right? 10th century BCE. This is older. Ein, Beit, Dal, Abdu, masculine singular nominative. Okay? Masculine singular noun. Abdu. And here we have Gziru. Gziru. Abdu. Gziru. Abdu. Gziru. So here we have what you would say is, right, the Ayin. And I'm sure he would probably want to pronounce this as Ghazar or something like that. And he might actually be correct. Right? However, if he tries to call this Ghab, Ghabd, that's going to be incorrect. So he can no longer just arbitrarily assign a phonemic value based on whim. So he's trying to call this
your earliest Hebrew, 10th century BCE. This is older. This is older. So I'm looking at the Hebrew, and I see just one grapheme in the Hebrew text of the two words that you ask us to look up. And I'm looking up the Ayin, Beit, and Resh, and I don't see that word that's being talked about here. Maybe you can help me with that. Anyway, I have to admit that when I look at the Ugaritic, I do see that there are two distinct graphemes being presented, and each grapheme has its own unique phonemic value. I just never seen that before. It's the first time I've ever seen this. I have to concur and thank you very much for that, because I never seen it, ever. Never have I ever seen it like that before. Oh, looks like he got me. Got me on the ropes. No way I can get out of this one, right? Wrong. Okay, all that's being done here is what we call begging the question. Okay, begging the question assumes proof of an unproved proposition. Just because Ugaritic has 30 phonemes and one grapheme per one phoneme, and just because Ugaritic is a cognate Northwest Semitic language, does not prove that ancient Hebrew, pre-Hellenistic ancient Hebrew, assigned more than one phonemic value to a single grapheme. Okay, there is no concrete evidence for this. Such evidence does not exist. So once again, we have an amateur, unpublished pseudo-scholar hiding behind a consensus. That's all this is. I mean, anyone can cheerlead a consensus, okay? And unpublished pseudo-scholars, that's what they do. Okay, but this is not a game. This is very serious, because people's faith and their belief in the scriptures, are on the line here. But if the consensus is correct, and Biblical Hebrew simply arose out of the continuum of Northwest Semitic languages, in the 11th century, 10th century BC, if that is correct, all right, then the Thorah, as I said, is not what it claims to be. And I'm sure you probably subscribe to the documentary hypothesis or some version of it, okay? That destroys the credibility of the biblical text. And it does so by begging the question. That's all it does. It doesn't prove what it assumes. Okay, so he confuses resh with dalet. They do look similar in the square script. But that's no excuse. He should know the difference and should not make a mistake like that on a video where he's trying to be an authority of the language. That's quite embarrassing. But let's look at the two graphemes that he's drawing our attention to in the Ugaritic script. The grapheme in the first row is the pharyngeal fricative. Okay, and it's basically just a corner wedge. I'm assuming he got some clay here and got a stylus and made this himself, this representation. The second grapheme in the second row is the velar fricative, and the way he drew it, or the way he inscribed it with the stylus is slightly wrong. It should be a horizontal wedge, okay, crossed by a diagonal coming from the bottom left to the upper right, and he's got the first horizontal tilted, and that's wrong. So whoever taught him to do that misled him, or he's just not competent enough to do it correctly, but it's wrong. Anyway, this is the, as I said, the velar fricative, and this is the stronger of the two phonemes. And linguistically, the stronger of the two phonemes is the more ancient. In other words, the harder sound is original and the softer sound came later. So if you were to agree, and I'm not saying everyone has to agree, but if you were to agree with the biblical text that Biblical Hebrew, even though it's not attested archaeologically older, but if you were to agree with the biblical text that Biblical Hebrew is older than Ugaritic, okay, then the stronger, the harder phoneme came first. And then, as time went on, a softer version of that phoneme developed. And when, that phoneme appeared, a new grapheme was created to accommodate that phoneme in the language where that phoneme appeared. And, and I know what I just said drives these paradouches crazy. You can see them foaming at the mouth what I just said. Prove that ancient Hebrew is older than Ugaritic. Prove it. Just like you cannot prove that Ugaritic is older. The archaeological record that we have is not complete. There are many sites still that have never been excavated. Okay, and to sit there and say that we will never find, a biblical Hebrew inscription older than Ugaritic is quite, stupid. You can't make, a pronouncement like that. Archaeology is always changing. There's always discoveries all the time. So this is what the Bible is saying. You can take it or leave it, but that is what the scriptures are saying. The evidence of the biblical text is saying that the Thorah was composed by a single author in the 15th century BCE, and this precedes Ugaritic. So 30 phonemes in Ugaritic, and that's supposedly older than Biblical Hebrew, but the Biblical Hebrew alphabet only has 22 letters. And so the theory is that when the Biblical Hebrew the alphabet was devised, that Some of the letters were assigned more than one phonemic value, and Mitzi is having a titsy fit about why I'm only assigning one value to this phoneme, the voiced velar fricative, which is just a fancy way of saying it's a guttural, and it sounds, the way it sounds is the sound you would make when you were about to gargle water. So it's a rattled G sound, and we use the English letters GH to represent it in transcription. But that's what the voiced velar fricative is all about. And the reason we're saying that's the original sound is because it's the harder sound. The pharyngeal fricative, the softer sound, which is very similar to aleph, is not the original sound. And we don't need to make a distinction between it. If we are believing the scriptures that Masha wrote the Thorah in the 15th century before there was Ugaritic, we don't need to assume that the alphabet that he used to write the scriptures, that there was more than one phonemic value for each letter. And notice how he speaks ex cathedra, that the language had both. The language had both of these phonemes that we are discussing. Ugaritic is a Northwest Semitic language, no one's denying that, but it's not Biblical Hebrew. Arabic is a Semitic language, it's not Biblical Hebrew. Akkadian is a Semitic language, it's not Biblical Hebrew. Just because it's a Semitic language does not mean they all have to behave the same. So you're basing your conclusions upon an unproven assumption, and you're not making that clear, you're not telling people that.
So for you people that are under this delusion with him, here's your chance to kind of break free, because he clearly doesn't know what he's talking about. I don't know, maybe he's conning you out of money, maybe he just likes having people worship him, and I don't know. But it's really a bucket full of pig feces, and that's what he's feeding you. Because this, under no circumstances, would ever be Ya'o Jacob. Not gonna be.
Don't you people ever look before you leap? But okay, let's be serious here. He's saying that the patriarch's name is a conjugated verb, and it cannot be a verbal sentence. Under no circumstances can it be deity followed by third person masculine singular verb. He's saying that's impossible. No, listen very carefully. He's saying that a biblical Hebrew name cannot be subject followed by verb, right, and be a terse verbal sentence if the subject is the deity. That's what he's saying. Okay, so let me repeat this so that we're clear. He is saying it is impossible in biblical Hebrew to have a personal name that's a terse verbal sentence that's constructed with subject followed by verb, and the subject is the deity. He's saying that's impossible, can't happen, and it can't be this name. That's what he's saying. Okay. All right, so let's prove him wrong in summary fashion by using an example that is not in dispute. You can dispute the example that he's using, but let's use one that's not in dispute, that shows that he does not know what he is talking about. This personal name that's on the screen in front of you now is a biblical Hebrew name. It belonged to one of the kings of the northern kingdom. And the way we pronounce this name in the Masoretic tradition is Yehu. Yehu. You'd see the Tsere vowel beneath the Yud. Then comes the third person masculine singular pronoun, who, the way it's pronounced in the Masoretic tradition. This is pronounced who. So what you have here is the deity name reduced to a single letter, prefixed to the pronoun. Now, the pronoun in this case is acting, it's within the semantic range of a verb, because there is no present tense verb in ancient Hebrew, only perfect and imperfect. So deity name is he, or deity name he, is another way of saying that the deity exists, because it's, to compensate for the lack of a present tense verb. So what does this name mean? The name means the deity is he, or the deity exists. That's what this name means. And you can look up your BDB, if you have your BDB handy or your hallowed or whatever you have, look up this name and it'll tell you just what I said, that this is not, it is an example of a theophoric name which has the deity name reduced to a single letter, the initial letter of the name. Now the question becomes, okay, well, is Yehu the correct pronunciation of that? And the answer is of course not. In Judaism, you know, I don't know if people are aware of this, but if you say the divine name, you've bought yourself a first-class ticket to hell. You're not supposed to ever pronounce the name. Of course, I don't believe that, but that's you know what I was taught. That's what you're taught in Judaism. So Yehu is clearly not the correct way to say it. That's the Masoretic pointing is designed to make sure that you don't come anywhere near close to saying the name. That's one of the reasons for the Masoretic system, vocalization system, is so that whenever you come across the name, and there's thousands of occurrences of the name, not just in isolated examples, but also in theophoric names, the Masoretic system makes sure that you don't come close to pronouncing the divine name. So you can throw away your Sefer Bible, it's garbage. So how would you pronounce this name in the pre-Hellenistic period, in the ancient period, when this king was actually on his throne? Okay, we're saying that the deity names of the ancient Near East are never vocalized in a nickname or pet form fashion. Those names are always fully pronounced, even if the orthography changes. You don't reduce, you don't contract it to a nickname. So we would say that this name must be pronounced, deity name, fully pronounced, followed by the second element, which is in this case the third person masculine singular pronoun. So Mr. Itsy Mitsy Spider simply does not know the language, does not know how biblical Hebrew names can be constructed, and on that basis alone, he is not qualified to be teaching anyone biblical Hebrew. This is a joke. He should know this. This is Hebrew 101. So it is possible to have a theophoric name and the first element, the deity name, simply be reduced to the initial letter of that name. Okay, that is not up for debate. If he wants to continue to hide behind, the safe confines of the consensus, all snuggled up in his, consensus blanket, that the name Jacob should not be pronounced the way I'm pronouncing it, okay, fine. But the way I approach scholarship is different. Consensus views need to be challenged, especially when they're coming from, European scholarship. You have to remember that there was a time when European scholars at the highest level, the consensus was that black people were savages, predisposed to be slaves. Okay, that wasn't just, a view shared by your run-of-the-mill average person. That was taught at the highest level of scholarship. That was once a consensus view. So consensus views, don't mean that something is true. You need to question, challenge, poke, and prod, and see if there's any validity to it. Another consensus view is that the king that we are talking about is actually mentioned in the Assyrian record of the royal kings of Assyria. There's an artifact called the Black Obelisk of Shalmaneser III, who was a king of the 9th century, and scholarship claims that this particular king of Israel that we are discussing is mentioned on this artifact. The problem with that is that it conflicts with the biblical dates. Also, the patronymic is different, so we've got a conflict there that scholarship is still trying to reconcile. So if you believe in the biblical dates, the biblical king can't be this king on this monument. It has to be a different person, even though it looks like they have a similar first name. They don't have the similar patronymic, meaning the name of their father is different. So scholarship is telling you to identify this king on this monument with the king that you read in the Bible, but they're not telling you that you have to basically correct the Bible. The Bible is wrong about the dates, and so you have to downdate the biblical king to make it line up with the 9th century Assyrian king Shalmaneser III, who had interaction, intercourse with this king that's mentioned on his monument. So I just wanted to mention that because, unless someone says I'm not being honest and fair. We don't believe that that king on that monument is the same king mentioned in the scriptures, because the scriptures put him, 40, almost 50 years earlier in time. So there's a chronological conflict. So there is a minority view in scholarship that that's not the same king, whereas a consensus view says it is. So you have to do your research and come to your own conclusions. But our position is that that is not the same king that we read about in the biblical text. As for the rest of Mitzi's rant in his clip, where he got real personal and went full transgender, to appeal to his base, that's fine. It's actually what I expected, since I have been trying to find that nerve. Looks like I hit it, so I consider it mission accomplished. Just one more thing before we close, so people aren't being misled by this itsy mitsy spider. He began his rant by saying, by questioning the way we are pronouncing the word Hebrew as ghabare. He has a problem with that. He's just not up to date. The word that we pronounce Hebrew is attested as far back as the 2nd millennium BC in Akkadian cuneiform. And in Akkadian they have no pharyngeal or velar fricative consonant. So what they used to represent the grapheme that we're debating here is a sign in their index that comes very close to it, but it's what we would call in the Hebrew alphabet the letter cha, which is the softer of the two hard gutturals. You have the chet, and then you have the chaf, and they use the sign that correlates or corresponds to the letter chaf, which proves that the letter ayin in the word Hebrew is the hardest guttural of the two phonemic options that we've been discussing. Okay, so what to tell you, and this Mitzi guy just is not up to date. Now it's normalized in English as Habiru, and you will, you can Google Habiru, and you will find that scholars do no longer dispute that that word refers to Hebrew. They just dispute that it refers to the biblical Hebrews. But there is no longer any debate among scholars that that word means Hebrew. There are just scholars who just don't want to accept that it's referring to, the biblical Hebrews of the Exodus, because of the implications of what that would mean. Also, if you just, jump forward to the Greek period and you look at the way the word Hebrew was rendered in Greek, you can see that it is the harder of the two phonemic values that is being used. Okay, Greek does not have the velar fricative or the pharyngeal fricative. So when they went to transcribe this word in Greek, they used the letter epsilon, okay, but it's with a diacritic on top of it, which indicates rough breathing. So the way you'd pronounce the word in Greek is Hebreos, Hebreos, Hebreos. That's the way you say Hebrew in Greek. And this is because the difficult phoneme that we are talking about, the velar fricative, didn't exist in Greek, so they used a letter that came close to that. Now, if it was simply a vowel, if it was the pharyngeal fricative, the softer of the two options, they could have just used an A vowel, the alpha, or just epsilon without the diacritic, but they didn't. The transcription is with a diacritic mark, which indicates rough breathing. So it's no question about it that even when this word was being pronounced in the Greek period, it had the harder guttural sound. So this is why we're pronouncing the word as ghabare and not Ivrit or Hebrew, although the English actually preserves this phoneme. One of the few times I will say something nice about the English language is that it actually preserves the fact that this initial consonant in this word is the harder of the two gutturals that we've been debating. So this Mitzi guy is just out of his league, and he's not up to date. So, okay, he is the one who's has no access to tangible, viable, substantive information. Okay, he's misappropriating information, not being honest with you about what the sources are actually saying. He is the worst type of individual, and here's your chance to break free. Zema speak.
Irga, one of my best.
If you say so.